Welcome everyone to the Public Safety and Veterans Subcommittee. We have Councilmember Williams and also Vice Mayor Gallegos on the phone. And really shortly coming up the elevator would be Councilmember Pastor. So we're going to start the meeting, call this meeting to order. And we have one card for public comment. Jeanne Summers, come on down. And thank you for all your hard work and taking away graffiti in the city of Phoenix and cleaning it up.
Good morning. And just as a reminder, our anti-graffiti conference is February 24th and 25th. And Councilman, we're looking forward to seeing you there. Thank you. At the last meeting, there was a discussion regarding a Central Avenue car show and the possibility of developing some guidelines for the activities. And after that, I learned that, for example, the Rock and Roll Marathon does not pay for police support. And then I also learned that there really aren't any guidelines for those kinds of activities. And with the budget talks coming up, I was just wondering if it would help if we would have some kind of guidelines so we could understand and better make decisions on the budget. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up. Seeing that there's no more public comment, we'll go to consent items number 2 and 3.
Minutes of the meeting?
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Councilwoman Williams.
I'd move approval of the minutes for January 11th, 2017.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, minutes are approved. Now we're on items 2 through 3. They're consent items.
I would move approval.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Aye.
All right, the ayes have it. And now we're into item number 4, Community Policing Trust Initiative follow-up. We have with us our city manager and our assistant chief, and Marshall.
Good morning, Chairman Nowakowski and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for having us here. Here with me today is Executive Officer Assistant Chief Mike Kurtenbach and Community Director. You got to help me with your title.
Director of Police Community Affairs.
Director of Police Community Affairs, Marshall Franklin. Both of these folks have been part of this from way back, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment, but certainly the Community Police Trust Initiative, or CPTI, and that grew out of, there, how are we doing here? There we go, getting the wrong one. The Community Police Trust Initiative, CPTI, really grew out of local and national context in 2014 and 15. Things that have kind of faded out of memory somewhat for many people, but not for others. Eric Garner in New York City, Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, Tamir Rice in Cleveland, Freddie Gray in Baltimore, Walter Scott in South Carolina, locally Michelle Cassot and Romaine Brisbane, are all names of members of communities that died in interactions with police officers, and really raised the dialogue about how police and community interact and what's that appropriate interaction, what that should look like. It created a national and local dialogue, including a Phoenix City Council meeting, where community members, and particularly members of our African American community, expressed concerns about how interactions between the community members and police can turn violent and what can be done about that. It was actually, people were very thoughtful and brought good ideas to it. As a result of that, as city manager, I appointed an advisory group known as CPTI, and they were charged to identify strategies. Let's see if I can get this doing better here. You got it? I don't know what's going on. We got a bad battery. You're going to hit it? All right. I appointed an advisory group next. It built upon the 2010, 2014 work of the Community Engagement and Outreach Task Force, which came from the 2010 incident where then Councilman Michael Johnson had an encounter with a police officer that really was a concern to the community and to the city. Next, please. That task force met for 3 years and had 34 recommendations to the police department, many of them which we sort of don't think about anymore, but Coffee with a Cop, for example, was one of the things that came out of that task force that started in 2010. Also, Spanish Language Police Academy, Public Safety Day at local churches, the position that Marshall currently has, all those grew out of the 2010 task force and some of those recommendations. The CPTI was designed to help residents and police work together to build trust. Next, please. Next slide. So with this group, I asked the CPTI to not go as high as 34 recommendations. That's too many for anybody to deal with. And police incorporated many of those 34, but I talked to them about maybe 7, and the group worked really hard and they came with 15, which is actually much more manageable and were good recommendations. And those are attached in your council report. Next, I reviewed this with the police leadership. Milton has been working on that. There's actually a website at phoenix.gov/police/outreach that initiatives that detail some of the review that police leadership has done. And police did some more work. Next, please. We held several listening sessions over the summer. I think each of you attended and hosted one of those over the summer, where we took input over the summer of 2016 for the police department. And in the interim, we transitioned from Chief Yonner to Chief Williams, and so now Chief Williams has had a chance to get her feet on the ground, and we're going to talk about what we're going to do with these. I want to thank Chief Kurtenbach and Marshall for their ongoing work. They do a lot of this every day. They're working on these recommendations. One of the things I learned from the Outreach Task Force was that it's important to do something like this, which is to bring it to a conclusion in terms of what we heard, what we're going to do, and how we're going to move forward. Not that CPTI membership will continue, but that they can be assured that the police department and city management are going to implement those things. So we want to just talk about those. Next, please. Next slide. So we really bucketed these 15 recommendations into 4 areas, and then there's one at the end we'll talk about. And the first one is really listening. That is, how does the police department engage with the community and listen to what the community has to say? That's an important commitment that these folks have, the chief has, and that I value. And those include recommendations about having at least 2 different community dialogue sessions in a year, holding a forum to talk specifically about 21st century policing, which was a report from the Department of Justice, getting feedback through survey tools about how the community feels and interacts with the police department. Those are sort of the big recommendations of the listening category. The second category is learning, and that involves something simple like let's publish what we consider to be a policy about doing the least harm in police and community interaction. Thank you. Studying best practices nationally, which actually Chief Kurtenbach is one of the best national best practices resources for other police departments. Training our officers in cultural competency and community relationships, and working with the community on educational initiatives about how police and members of the public, particularly our young people, can interact together well and successfully. And that was one that had a lot of dialogue from the group about the role of the community in that recommendation to help the police with that one. The third one is reporting. A lot of data requested, transparency, and putting information out and making it publicly available. That involved things which are already being done, like publishing our workforce statistics. And so every quarter, the police department now has on that website things that they've reported to you about the demographic makeup of the department and the demographic makeup of our recruit classes. And so, for example, I was just looking this morning, we can see that the department is currently 75% of our sworn officers are white, but about 64% of our recruits are Anglo or white. Like I think 17% of our department is Latino, and almost 29% of our department recruits right now are Latino. One of the other ones I saw was we are maybe 18% female. Our recruits are about 13% female. So it identifies where we have work to do, and that's the work that's going on there. So publishing data about the workforce composition, about positive things like commendations and positive work going on in the community by the police department. The community members said, we want to hear the good things. We never hear that. And so it's important for us to put that out there. And then also data on traffic stops, on use of force, when officers use their weapons, and in custody deaths. Keeping statistics, keeping data, and putting that on the website. One exception that the chief and I have taken to the recommendations that are not going to implement was there was a request from this group for the police department to report every time an officer drew and trained their weapon to try and get information on that. Understanding it from the police perspective, that is a lot of paperwork. And from my perspective, I'm not sure what that's going to give us. I also worry about officers thinking about their actions because of paperwork and putting themselves in jeopardy. So that the idea of reporting every time an officer draws his or her weapon from their holster is not one that we are going to pursue because we think it's overly burdensome. But we think that these other pieces of data in here are really important, and we can do those. The fourth one is equip, and there's not a lot of specific recommendations from CPTI, but it grows out of the previous one. Particularly, the body camera program is seen by many members of the community as an important transparency piece. The council's already set a path in the next 3 to 5 years to get body cameras implemented with our officers. And things we even take for granted, like continuing to equip with less lethal force, like tasers and stun bags, and giving officers tools in their use of force is important. And finally, after these 4 things, was one that the group spent a lot of time, and that is a civilian oversight. This is really talking about an opportunity for members of the public to have an outlet for complaints about police actions, an outlet that's different from complaining to a police officer. So today, if you have an interaction with a police officer that you don't believe is appropriate, we basically have the outlet of complaining to the officer's supervisor or the Professional Standards Bureau. They do a good job. They take their jobs very seriously. But some members of the community feel like I'm complaining about the police to the police. How can I be assured that anything is going to be done with that? So many other cities have outlets in the civilian, with civilians for those sorts of concerns. And we think that Chief Williams and I, Chief Gertenbach, Marshall, Milton, as we've talked about it, we think the city really is an outlier in not having some sort of outlet like that. I personally don't think that some of the ways that bigger cities have gone with large boards with huge staffs that really duplicate the investigative power of the police is something we want to do. But we need to look at the whole field of this. And so Milton has actually started some research with staff on what are other cities doing, what are the pressures there, what are the alternatives that we can review, and then we would have some recommendations for the council once we've sort of processed that whole thing through. It's not fully baked, it's not fully formed, it's nothing that we're asking you to say, yep, I'm going to do that, or no, we should never do that. It was an important piece of CPTI that I think we should continue to do research and study on. So that is very briefly summarizes the work that's been done, the recommendations that were made to me, the processing that the chief has done with city management, and we wanted to report that to you. This isn't for action, but it certainly is important, I know, to this committee. You have tracked the efforts of this along. You have hosted meetings to get feedback on it, which I very much appreciate. And we wanted to be here today to answer any questions you might have. So
Any
thank you.
comments or questions for my colleagues?
I just want to make a quick comment.
Councilmember Williams?
Thank you for all the work that you've done on this. And of course, anybody who's participated in the community, that's greatly appreciated, because I know a lot of people have spent a lot of time on this. And I think you've come up with pretty good recommendations. My only fear is on the very last one, on the Civilian Oversight Committee. I think it's extremely important how you define their roles, responsibilities, etc., because I have seen in other cities where it runs amok, it becomes a political nightmare, and it discourages people and police officers from doing what we want them to do, to interact together, to be a partnership, to make it a community effort. I don't want it to set up sides, so to speak. I think it's very important that civilian oversight, that things are exposed online, the data is there, but I want to be very careful on the roles and responsibilities, how they're defined and what their powers are. Because we have enough excitement when the chiefs try to discipline somebody now, and we know what happens, or doesn't happen, I guess I should say. So that, I just want to make that comment.
Thank you. I share those concerns.
Any other comments? Councilmember Pastor?
So I think this is a great start, great effort. Community really wants to be a participant and really solve, there's not necessarily an issue, but solve how do I want to say this? Be able to participate and communicate before there are issues.
Yes.
One of the items that out in the community and my community meetings that I constantly get feedback on is that I feel like that this is happening at a very high level. And really those on the ground that are working with community members or our CAOs or others should really have a voice and participate in shaping this along with those community members. Because I think you will hear from them some of these dynamics that are happening, especially in the civilian oversight. You know, last night I was at a community meeting and it came up. I had a problem. I went to this. This is how I felt. This is how I felt I was treated. But what do I do with it now? Who do I go to?
Right.
And you know, and it was one of those conversations that we had last night. It's not necessarily with the police. It could be the whole overall system, like in particular the operator. It was more of, I felt like they were rude to me, disrespectful. I'm trying to give them a problem, and you know, we talked it through and also said, well, it all depends on who's calling us, what they're saying, and sometimes they're not able to do what they're asking for. So it all depends on the situation. But I really feel like, I really strongly feel, because this is happening at a high level, that everybody needs to understand what is being requested and how do we put it into play, how do we model it, how do we, you know, because most officers will say, and I agree, they are listening. They are listening to their community. They are hearing their community. But what does that mean in listening? There are certain things we're being asked to do that we can't do. Just legally we can't do. So I think this is a delicate dance. I think it's a great effort. My other question is, when will this roll out? What's the timeline of all these pieces?
That's a great question, Councilwoman. So in the report, we tried to, working with the chiefs, to put specific dates to each one of the pieces. And so it's really throughout 2017, and we tried to put either a month or a quarter for each one of those, by which time it would be in process and what that would mean to be in process. The civilian oversight, I'm not quite sure on that. We need to do our review. The committee asked that we do it within 6 months. That would be ideal, but it may be when we get into it that it's going to take more research, so we just have to be flexible on that. But we are going to initiate all of these now.
As Councilwoman Williams stated earlier, I do think you, in the civilian oversight, is definitely to define the roles and responsibilities. Because at the end of the day, they sit, they give their time, and really at what authority do they really have? And so once they make a decision, what will happen with that decision? And what is the process? And so I really think that the civilian oversight needs to be looked at in a way that it is a win-win for everybody that is participating on this oversight committee. So thank you.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor, you have any comments?
I do. Thank you so much. I think, like my colleagues, I also will focus my comments on recommendation 5 with the civilian oversight. I think that will be the one that will get the most attention and has already gotten the most interest from the community. Can you talk about how the Civil Service Board might be impacted by that? Because I think some of the items the community asked us to address with civilian oversight are already addressed by the Civil Service Board. And there may need to be, I think the Civil Service Board ought to be involved in the conversation, but there may need to be some changes to the Civil Service Board as well as we move forward in this area.
Certainly, Councilman Nowakowski, Vice Mayor Gallego. I think the intention here is not for this to infringe upon the already laid out role of the Civil Service Board in council ordinance. So the Civil Service Board's job is to review and be an appeal route for employees covered by civil service rules, and that exists in our labor relations ordinance. This is envisioned really more for if there are concerns. I think Councilwoman Pastor expressed one she heard yesterday. I felt like I was treated rudely by someone in the police department. Right now, what we would tell them is, well, you can call the city manager's office, you can call your council office, or you can call the police department, and they'll look into it. Well, what happens is if they call the city manager's office, we're going to ask the police department to look into it because they have the investigators and the reviewers. This would be perhaps another place for people to go where they feel like it's a more independent type of source to be sure that their concerns are addressed and reviewed by someone who is not inside the police department, but with some sort of authority. And we got to decide what that authority actually is and how much staffing we want to put to that. That's sort of the trick we've got to think about and give options for. But I hadn't envisioned that this would tread on the already established authority of the Civil Service Board in how this laid out. But if the council wants to review the Civil Service Board, we can certainly do that, but that is part of the labor relations ordinance.
Well, one of the questions that came up at District 8 meetings with CPTI was, what is the role of the community and the victim's family in the Civil Service Board? Should the community be able to participate in a formal way, or is that inappropriate? And so I just want to make sure I understand what to share with my residents.
I want to be sure that I give you good information on that, so I can't give you a definite answer right now. But generally, the point of the Civil Service Board is to have an appeal for the employee's civil service rights, more so than being a forum for sort of a more of a judicial forum in the way we're used to it for people to come in and make complaints. But let me make sure I can get that put together for you, factually correct, and get that to you and the subcommittee members.
Wonderful, because I think if the Civil Service Board isn't the right venue for community members to be involved, then some of that would fall to the group that Milton is studying creating with recommendation 5, where the community also wants to be involved.
Yes.
Great, thank you so much.
And just some comments. I believe our city of Phoenix should be a city for all people, that people feel safe when they pick up that phone and call 911, that they don't feel that they're going to become a victim no matter what your color your skin is, the language you speak, or who you are. And I believe that we as the city of Phoenix believe that also, and that's why the city manager has taken this on at the highest level to make sure that all residents are represented fairly. That's why we took it out to each district. We had hearings. That's why we're continuing to have meetings, not just once, but twice a year, to make sure that we have this ongoing input on how we can better communicate, how we can better serve, how we can better protect our communities and all peoples of our communities. no matter who you are, what walk of life you are. Saying all that, there's needs to be some type of connection. About 30 years ago, I mean, I was a college student involved with the Police Chiefs Advisory Board for Hispanics because of the same situation that was happening 30 years ago within the Hispanic and African American community. So advisory boards were created, and it first started off with Hispanics and African Americans, and now we're up to about a dozen or so. And I believe that it's a way to connect with community leaders, grassroots leaders, and individuals from different walks of life to actually give advice and allow the chief of police, no matter if it was 30 years ago or now, what's going on within our communities and kind of have a grasp of what's going on within the city. Saying that, I think it's really important that we have these dozen groups that somehow, some way, that they're connected with this oversight committee. The other thing too is I'm going to put on a future agenda item that whole civil service board, because I believe that we have to intertwine all these groups that are giving us advice and helping guide our police force in a positive way, some type of connection with each other, so it doesn't seem like we have one group over here, another group here, another group there. Also, really just giving some of the things that I'm hearing out there is, we have police officers that are under investigation of doing wrong and that they're still being put in the same community where the outrage is. So maybe figuring out what to do with that, and how do we respect the police officer, because you're innocent until you're proven guilty, and sometimes there are accusations from the community, and we need to make sure we get the truth out of it. So we need to go through our investigation. Sometimes it takes a week, sometimes it takes a couple months. I know that our new chief wants to have things going quicker, and I think we're going to have a quicker response. But it's just a process, and we need to make sure that we're all communicating with each other. And I believe that if we can bring, as a future agenda item, maybe the whole civil service board, as the vice mayor was saying, she's hearing concerns in her district. I believe we're hearing the same types of concerns in our district, and just making sure that working with the top, our city manager, all the way down to your council members, that we're going to make sure that this works. And this oversight committee is really a way to get input from everyone.
I think that's a great idea. I'll certainly be happy to bring the HR director, labor relations, and help connect the dots for all of us. The questions that the vice mayor asked about how does civil service board interact with this whole concept, I think would be very useful. If I could just also take a second, I didn't at the beginning, we have a CPTI member here with us, Otieno Ogwell. If you'd raise your hand. Really interesting story about Otieno. He started with us, and about halfway through, Chief Yonner, who was the chief at the time, got invited to come back to Washington, D.C. for a national forum, and was invited to bring a community member with him. And he asked Otieno to join him in Washington, D.C. at the Police Executive Research Forum. They published a whole document about that series, and sort of gave Otieno a national platform and the chief with him. So it's kind of sort of a interesting success story from CPTI is how Otieno has been engaged nationally on this issue.
Well, thank you for all your support and efforts. The other thing is, after the committee or the subcommittee is chosen, would you bring it back to this committee so we can actually know what the recommendations are?
Absolutely.
And maybe even have us give you some recommendations of our own too, or some comments. And the other thing is that we talked about training as one of the goals. I know that we hired an individual to do the multicultural diversity training. Do we have anybody that we replace that person with?
I'll ask Chief Kurtenbach to talk about that.
Councilman Nowakowski, the short answer is no, but we are looking at other partnerships, unique partnerships. For example, the National Police Foundation based out of Washington, D.C., Chief Williams and I are engaged in dialogue about bringing procedural justice training performed by Yale University to the Phoenix Police Department. We believe that would have tremendous value at little to no cost to the department. And we're looking at other opportunities to enhance the training we're already providing. Our new module training 2017 will roll out next month, which will include elements of that, not an outside presenter as we had last time, but we're looking to weave that in going forward.
Once the
The-
Whitaker Group
yeah.
thing fell apart, we did an RFP, and it didn't provide us with really anything at an acceptable quality or price that we could bring to the council. And so they've gone back to the drawing board to see if there's another way to approach this.
The reason I was asking that, I believe that individual or that person should be a part of this oversight to hear and understand what's going on within the community so that they can actually bring it back and be a part of their training. Thank you. Councilmember Pastor?
I have one question. How are assistant chiefs and commanders part of this whole process?
Are you speaking of the CPTI
Yes, I am.
process? So
Or how-
Assistant Chief Kurtenbach actually was one of the lead staffers with the group and engaged folks in there, but I'll let him tell you how that went.
Councilman Nowakowski and Councilwoman Pastor. So as City Manager Zerker said, Director Franklin and I had the unique opportunity to sit in all of the meetings with the CPTI, and we don't operate in a vacuum. So in our command staff and our executive staff meetings, I was able to bring that information back to share. And the hope when we share that information in command staff is that our commanders and our administrators will in turn share that with their staff, which is in line now with previously Chief Yonner and now Chief Williams' commitment to inclusivity through all levels of the organization. To your point earlier, there shouldn't just be certain members of the organization that drive the discussion. We need to bring all representatives, to the extent that we can, to the table. I think you may also be aware, going back to the Community Engagement Outreach Task Force, I had the opportunity to work in a similar role at a different rank. And what we did back then was bring officers in once the recommendations were made to ask them to help us shape what the mechanisms for implementation should look like. So we'll continue with that same practice.
If you don't mind, Councilman, Chairman Nowakowski. and-
Absolutely,
and
Director. I
Council-
like that, Director.
And Councilwoman Pastor, the other thing, in addition to the things that Chief Kurtenbach mentioned, during our listening sessions, Chief Yana required that all of our command staff, which would be our commanders, to select at least 2 of those listening sessions to go to. So our commanders were in the room hearing directly from the community that they serve and represent, the concerns, the issues, the support also of our police department, as well as many of those commanders asked their officers to be there, the community action officers, some of the patrol officers. So Chief Williams has continued, as Chief Kurtenbach stated, to spread an expectation that not only are we as an executive team, the mayor, the council, the city manager, expected to be involved and engaged, but also our command staff, to your point, that they're the ones, especially in our patrol divisions, that have the most impact on those in our community. So I just wanted to add that, that Chief Williams has been very, very clear about this has to be bottom down, top up in terms of these efforts. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Well, thank you, City Manager, and thank you, Milton, also for all your hard work in this project, Chief and Director, for everything you're doing, and all those individuals that made this possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're on the item number 5, the final 4, partnership and planning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the Public Safety Subcommittee. I'm TJ Martin with the Phoenix Police Department, currently an Assistant Chief. What I'd like to do is introduce the team that I have with me: Commander Jeff Alexander, Assistant Chief Fire Department, Kevin Cockbrenner from the Homeland Defense Bureau, City of Phoenix Emergency Manager Lisa Jones sitting next to me. They're going to give you an update on the Final Four planning that we have been part of for quite a while now. This slide kind of says it all for me. Partnership and planning. We have been planning for quite some time. As a matter of fact, it started back actually in 2003 when we built the Homeland Defense Bureau with support from city management, city council, all city staff, and the community as well. We're actually 52 days out now from the Final Four, And we developed what we believe quite a while ago is a blueprint for success. As you saw with the Super Bowl and many other major events that we have participated in, we do it better than anybody else. And we deserve to pat ourselves on the back because, quite frankly, we are the best at doing what we do. We developed an all-hazards incident management team that we use on a day-to-day basis. One of the concepts is the Home and Defense Bureau exists 24/7. So any event that comes up, whether planned or unplanned, this team is here and ready to go to work to make sure that all the citizens of the community are safe. Before I pass it on and begin the presentation, I do want to thank Don Rogers, local organizing committee, is here. Outstanding partner. It's really nice to work with an organization and an individual that is so supportive of what we do on a day-to-day basis. We've been in countless meetings together, and the partnership has been seamless. I'll pass it on. Jeff, are you first? Commander Jeff Alexander is going to take it from here, and then I believe Chief Cockbrenner, and then Lisa Jones.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. I'm Jeff Alexander. I'm Commander over Homeland Defense Bureau and the Traffic Bureau, and one of the incident commanders for this event, along with my counterpart in police with, and Fire Chief Scott Walker and Mike Ong. So what we wanted to do today is kind of walk you through 3 of the venues, talk a little bit about the planning that we've done for these venues and what they'll look like. The first off is the music festival, which will be held at Hance Park. From the PD perspective, we are working closely with NCAA and Turner Broadcasting, who are running the event. And as Chief Martin said, the NCAA, Turner Broadcasting, and local organizing committee have been outstanding to work for and work with during this event. Out of all 3 that we've done, I think they are right up there with the best of them. So it's been a great process. This shows the Hance Park footprint and what that will look like. One of the unique things about this event is that we will have a forward operations center outside of the venue where we will have staffed along with Turner Group, and they will have representation in the EOC and the RIMT so that we are functioning closely together and we have great operation out of that venue. We have a plan in place for security, working with private security at this venue, both inside the venue, the outer perimeter of the venue, and the traffic portion of this venue. One of the unique things about Hance Park is that it is surrounded by a neighborhood or neighborhoods. And so we're taking that into great consideration and have a plan how to address the concerns that we know we're going to get from the neighborhood because of the event and the parking issues and the loudness factor of the event. We will have officer staff throughout the neighborhood to answer any complaint that we get from the neighborhoods immediately. We'll have tow trucks staffed that if we have parking issues, driveways blocked, etc., that we can immediately respond and take care of those problems very, very quickly. One of the other things that we've done to try to alleviate problems within the neighborhood is you can see the 3 ACP points. They're those 2 double dotted locations on the southern half of the venue and over on by Central Avenue. We've developed a plan to shut those down in a manner that will hopefully eliminate pressure into the neighborhoods by people that don't get into the venue space. One of the things that we saw in Houston is that, who had this last year, is that the crowd for Music Fest was very, very large, and they had a very, very large contingent of people that were not able to get inside because they were at capacity. We fully expect to have the same situation here, and so we've developed a plan to close those entry points accordingly so that we can have people move over to the Central Avenue location where they only gain access at that point, which will hopefully eliminate because that's Hance Park down there by Central Avenue underneath the bridge there, so it's an open space. Hopefully eliminate the large crowds that could disperse into the neighborhoods and cause problems there. One of the other things that we're implementing, which is new to this event, is traffic calming devices on key streets that lead into the event space. Given the world events at venues such as this, we are taking best practices and implementing devices that will inhibit and eliminate the ability for people to drive into that event space, but yet allow pedestrian traffic to flow through there as well as emergency vehicles.
Can you explain what that would be?
It's significant barricading in a manner that won't allow a vehicle to drive through it. And then finally, our transit plan, which is always a key component to getting people in and out of this venue space. We've been working closely with public transit and Metro Light Rail to develop a plan where specifically on egress, which I think is going to be a problem point for us because everybody will leave at the same time. We've developed a pretty solid plan with augmented resources so that we can get people out of that space in a very efficient manner, and I think it's going to work very, very well. That's it for that event space from the police department. Chief Cockburner? Same.
Thank you. Go ahead. You have a question?
What does the big star mean? Is that like central location or?
I don't know why that big star is designated at the library,
Okay.
to be quite honest with you.
Thank you.
So if we can stay on that slide, for the fire side, we have plans to put foot mobile teams inside the venue, and we've worked with Turner to create an island in the middle so that we can access the crowd, because as you imagine, the area in front of the stage gets pretty congested. We also have a command post located at First and Moreland, which is going to allow us to marshal a lot of resources, our ambulances, those kinds of things, so that we can be able to get people out of the venue and transported if need be. We also have joint hazard assessment teams that'll be roving the area looking for chemical, nuclear, biological type events, and so that's pretty much what we've got planned for the actual Hance Park piece. Will be in Turner Broadcasting Forward Command Post unified with police as well. The number of people that can stay in the venue is determined by the fire marshal. So the fire marshal will be in our EOC and monitoring those numbers, and we've rehearsed how we're going to monitor those numbers. And as the commander talked about, we're going to be proactive as we reach those numbers in closing down those access control points or ACPs, and in a way that what's left of the crowd will be on the west side, and they should be able to hear the music and be in a comfortable spot, and that will help us with issues as stated before on the streets and the neighborhood traffic, those kinds of things.
I know one of the things that we talked about is creating a door hanger that would have information, telephone numbers and all that. Has that been produced yet or distributed or?
So that will, Councilman Nowakowski, members of the board, that will be one of the things that we will do as we get closer to the venue or to the event. I know that CED as well as the precinct and our staff have been working in that neighborhood to notify them of the event and give them kind of an overview of what that event will look like. And as we get closer to that event, that's when we'll do more outreach to them to make sure that they have that information on what the event will look like, traffic impacts to them, and the hours of the event, and that will include door hangers.
And for those individuals listening, what we ask for is some type of emergency numbers and contact numbers that people living within that area, within a half mile or so, that they have some type of a contact or some type of information where if they need help, they can go to the right person. There'll be a special assigned numbers for that. The other thing I was going to ask you is this whole event's going to be fenced off, right?
Councilman Nowakowski, that is correct. There is a liquor license, again, applicable to this event space. And in order to control that, there is fencing that is totally around that venue area, so that's how we have the 3 access control points. And that will be the only locations where people can get in and out of that event space.
I was concerned because I looked at this map. It says beer garden. Looks kind of small for an event this big, right? So it's actually the whole event
Yes,
is a beer garden.
that will just be where they sell the beer.
Is that where they're selling it? Oh, okay. I have a
Councilmember.
question. My question is about the west side. Is that just going to be open? Anybody could come and that's our crowd controlling area?
Councilwoman Pasteur, that is correct. That will be our overflow area if our plan works as we think it will. as we have to close down entry points because of capacity, we will inform people that they need to go to that Central Avenue location, which is the open end of Hance Park on the west side of Central. And that will allow us to control that crowd in a better manner and not have any impacts to the neighborhoods as well.
Okay, so if I go to the west side, because I'm thinking of the west side, if I go to the west side, will there be food trucks, or what will be over there that as the overcrowding is going over there, what type of, I guess,
A video screen of the
video
event,
screen
yeah.
activity, you know,
Councilwoman Pastor, Councilman Nowakowski, at this point, there is no plan to do anything at that western location. They will be able to hear the music. They may be able to see some of the stage, but as far as anything active for those people to do, there's nothing planned at this point. But that will be the only location, once the other two locations are closed, that will be reopened again. So if we lose capacity inside during the event and we have the ability to reopen the event space, that will be the only location that we will reopen to allow people back in through.
So one of the challenges of managing a free concert is that usually a lot more people show up than there's room for. And so there's a lot of fan activations that are not on the west side, but and extend all the way up to the downtown area and the convention center. So we're going to be messaging as throughout the day to through Facebook and those kinds of things for people who didn't arrive early enough to get into the concert. There's many, many, many more things for them to do. And the whole downtown area is going to be alive with activities. And so they will be encouraged to, you know, you came all the way down here, don't get dressed up for nothing. Go and enjoy yourself. There's a lot of things going on.
Just a comment. I remember our Super Bowl. We had to close the event because there's so many people. One of the confusion was people didn't know what was going on, so they were moving to the arena side of the event, trying to get in. Then they would move on to the Washington side. Is there any type of signage or some kind of a digital board that we as a city own, or can we ask the promoters to basically let people have information? Because once they know it's closed, because it's really word of mouth, and when you have 5,000 people, it's kind of hard to control that message. And I think if you let people know that the event's closed, they'll probably move on to other activities within the city. And I believe that also the open container law, maybe on that same digital sign, we can actually let people know that you can't be drinking or having an open container in the park. Just
On
a
the west
suggestion,
side?
yeah,
Okay.
on the west side. Anything else? Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
My question is, the library going to be closed during that concert?
Oh, no.
Part of the beer garden? Yeah. I would just think it would be
It will be
very
open,
difficult
Roxanne, yes?
to monitor what's going on inside the library while you've got all of it. I mean, it just doesn't sound good.
Chairman Nowakowski, I want to also add that the Phoenix Local Organizing Committee are coordinating many, many volunteers that will be out and about, so that if we do have changes or information that needs to be relayed, they will be doing that, as well as the signage that you mentioned.
what day is is this a Sunday or a Saturday?
Councilwoman Pastor, Chairman Nowakowski, the event will run Friday, the 31st through April 3rd. The event space up at Hance Park, the music festival, will actually begin Friday afternoon. They'll have concerts on Saturday through the evening, and then Sunday through the evening. And then Monday, that event will be closed.
So if I'm going to the library, what is the parking going to look like for those that go to the library?
Is the library going to be open those days?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So how will that look like? Because how do you determine
Who goes to the library? and
who's
who's
going to
not?
the library and who's going to the concert? I mean, I'll
Councilwoman,
say I'm going to the library, park my car, go inside the library, go out the other library, and enter the entryway of, I guess, number 1.
But Councilwoman, you'd never do that, would you?
Of course not. But that's my thought process.
Roxanne?
Oh, certainly, Councilwoman Pastor, that is one of the great considerations that in the planning and working with the police department and the library that we've been working on. And the police will have additional rovers in kind of stationed around the library parking lot. And that's one of the things that the library is really sensitive to. And so they'll be able to know, like when people go in to go into the library, that there may be that case where they go in for a couple hours and then go into the concert venue, but the library parking lot will be cleared at the end of the night for patrons. And so we're working really hard through the library to message that, as well as that after hours, then the city needs that parking lot to support the staff that is working the venue at the music festival. Additionally, police will have parking in the library parking lot, so we're hoping that is kind of just a visual reinforcement that there's no overnight parking in the library parking lot. But the library will be open Saturday and Sunday, and of course on Friday is a city holiday, so they will be closed. That's a Cesar Chavez Day.
Mr. Chairman, in addition, also on Saturday, that's when the 2 semifinal games are being played. And so the ball games are going on into the evening on Saturday. So the fans that come from the 4 schools, they'll be all about the ball games while some of this is also going on. So there is something to draw attention away from just, let's go to the park.
What is our library hours for Saturday? I know it's closed. Is it closed on Sunday also, or?
I'm becoming a little bit of an aficionado in the library services. On Saturday, they are 9 to 5, and on Sunday, they're 1 to 5.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Vice Mayor?
During the Super Bowl, the traffic patterns were, they impacted sort of between 7th Street and 7th Avenue all the way to the freeway. I suspect this won't be quite as large, but would it be possible to brief the medical services providers in the area all the way to Banner, just so that they know what to expect in terms of traffic, so that we can make sure that emergency medical traffic can get to all of the medical facilities that are in this general area?
Absolutely, we'll do that.
Wonderful. And I think it would also be great if we can check in. So like Councilman Nowakowski and I represent people who live all around there, but we have some, such as like Deck Park Vista, which is senior living and might have some particular unique concerns. So it would be wonderful if we can also reach out to them as well and just make sure they're familiar. I think during the champ game, the groups around the concert area had a lot more information and knew what to expect. So that we really learned from the Super Bowl. Like we can continue to build on that and just make sure people know what to expect, so they know if there's a potential street closure, they can plan their commute patterns or just stay away if they decide to.
And other concern just to put on the record is we also had the Pride Parade that Sunday, and controlling especially 3rd Street, it's going to be kind of chaotic.
Councilman
We
Nowakowski.
looked into that and making sure that.
Councilman Nowakowski, yes, we're working in conjunction with the Pride Festival and the Pride Group to ensure that both of those events go off seamlessly. We're coordinating those efforts together for this for our event.
Thank you.
The next, if there's nothing else, the next slide that we have is the event hotels for the NCAA Final Four. The city of Phoenix, specifically the downtown area, has all 5 of the NCAA hotels. 4 of those hotels will be team hotels once the teams are identified, and the other will be an NCAA staff hotel. The police department is working with private security to staff all 5 of those hotels 24/7. We will be working closely with the teams. The way the teams operate at the college level is they have their own security. that will come in. We will work with them to develop a security plan once those teams are identified and work with them closely to ensure that everything goes smoothly in each one of those hotels. One of the goals, obviously, is to make sure that the people that are here for the NCAA staying in those hotels are safe in them. And one of the things that the NCAA continually points out is the experience for the student athlete and as well as the student athlete families is a priority for them. And so one of our goals in each of those 4 hotels that are hosting a team is to ensure that they do have an enhanced experience and that nothing is done in those hotels that could cause that experience to degrade.
For the Fireside on the downtown, we'll have another forward operating base downtown. We will work with the convention center that has their own medical plan to be able to support that as the need arises. We will continue to monitor the crowd sizes and the traffic for our downtown stations like we did in the Super Bowl. If we have to pre-position assets or move assets out in order to make sure that we have the ability to respond, we'll do that in real time because that whole operation is connected back to the Emergency Operations Center. And then that will provide continuity from downtown all the way through Hance Park. And we plan to do that with some medic carts and bike teams so that we can access through the crowds.
And finally, the Fan Fest, which is on the lower level at the Phoenix Convention Center. Again, we are working with private security, the NCAA, and Turner for a security plan for inside that venue space as well as outside the venue space. Much like up at Hance Park, the neighborhood issue and ensuring that the neighborhood is well informed comes into play with the Fan Fest as far as the business community is concerned. Much like we've done for college football and the Super Bowl, we are reaching out, having outreach with the business community through the Downtown Phoenix Partnership and others to ensure that they understand what that event is going to look like, what the traffic closures are going to look like for that event. One of the other things that is critical that we have implemented, and we did it very well at college football, is a parking plan. Because of, we've already discussed, the Hance Park parking is not substantial, and so we are going to be significantly utilizing the parking structures in and around the downtown community, and then utilize mass transit and as well as a trolley system that will be in place to move people from the convention center to Hance Park and back and vice versa. We will monitor garage capacity and use social media and other methods to ensure that people know what parking garages are open and where they can find parking in the downtown area so that they can get into either the Fan Fest or up to Hance Park as well. As Chief Cockburner kind of mentioned, one of the priorities for us is to ensure that we have an easy transition from people going from Fan Fest at the Convention Center up to the Music Festival at Hance Park. And we have activations in and around that area to ensure that if people want to walk or they want to take mass transit, that they can do that and they can do that easily so that we are able to utilize both spaces even though there's some distance in between them so that the fan experience for these events is very good. And finally, our IMT, incident management team at the EOC, is supported heavily by other city departments as well as public safety and private entities to ensure that at any of these events, that if we have an issue that arises, that we have the resources in our incident management team that can quickly identify solutions to those problems and provide resources to eliminate anything that may come up during that event. We've done that for all 3 of the major events that we've had so far, and it's worked very, very well, and we've just augmented that for every event as they come.
Chairman Nowakowski, members of the subcommittee, I'll wrap up by talking about our multi-agency coordination center. As you know, we've been working for months to bring all of our partners together, all of the agencies together that will work together on that event. As several have mentioned, we have established a model with the Super Bowl where over 250 individuals, agencies, organizations work together to address any events, any situations that were to come up. We feel like we've really used that model to great effect. Used it through the football championship, and will continue to use that through the Spinal Four. The pictures indicate a tabletop exercise that we had last week. We have another exercise planned in a few weeks. Again, working together, getting to know faces, understanding what our capabilities are and how we will address anything that comes up. I think that's it. We'll open it up to questions if you have them.
Councilmember Williams?
How many agencies and who are they beyond Phoenix?
So we have, I mean, from the local agencies, obviously the football event is in Glendale, so we will have counterparts in there, as well as FBI, local, regional, tribal, even partners in the EOC working together. So we have the MAC, which is the Multi-Agency Coordination Center, as well as the Incident Management Team. So again, one place addressing all of the incidents and the events as well that are happening. I think you mentioned the Pride event as well. So one place to address all of the issues that come up. So really all of the partners that relate to that, as well as our City of Phoenix departments. In our tabletop last week, we had every department represented that would have an emergency response. So
When you say every department, I mean, are you talking city departments or other cities' departments?
Both. Again, our city departments have been working together. We work together on the monsoons and the storm events that come up, so we're used to that. But getting them into the EOC and understanding the external partners that we work with to ensure success, I think is an excellent thing. Chief?
One of the things I'd like to add is that as we go through this, several times we may see things that partners we need to add. It's very easy for us to be flexible and add those partners, whether public or private, to bring them in. The relationships that we have built over the years as a city and as a team lend us that capability to pull in resources so we can sit right in the same room and have face-to-face conversations with people. That's worked very, very well for us. One of the things that I wanted to emphasize was, and you've heard it a lot here today, is the we. That's how we operate, and that is what has made us successful. Is nobody is excluded. We bring partners in, and partners are always willing to come in and help.
I would also add, Mr. Chairman, the NCAA is embedded in there as well. It is their event, so we're communicating with them throughout. So everything that happens, they're aware of it, and we work in collaboration with the event producer on strategies and things that need to be done to respond to issues.
Councilmember Pastor?
So it sounds like it's going to be a very busy weekend extension. Not only the NCAA, but also local festivals. So I'm just going to throw this out there. I'm assuming everybody will be all hands on deck. And there, even if you're, unless you're suffering from the flu, everybody is out and covering all areas, not only these events, but also covering our neighborhoods. Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor, any comments?
Just wanted to thank everyone for all this advanced planning. It's wonderful that we have the great partnership with Dawn and her folks, and that even the federal government and other agencies. So thank you for putting us on the map in a good way.
We hear the baby okaying that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, he wants to party. He's excited about the party.
Just a comment. I remember during the Super Bowl and the other big events we had downtown, having the convention center so close to Block 23 was really convenient. It was nice that we were able to close some of the streets where people coming out of the convention center were able to go to the event and back and forth. This is going to be probably a little over a half a mile away from each other, the two main events in downtown Phoenix. Is there any way to create a pedestrian area or mall, or even look at 3rd Street and closing that down and having that tram go back and forth with pedestrians walking and not having traffic? Because one of the things that I noticed that outside of that area that we had closed off, the streets closed off, we still had people walking in the streets, and it was kind of chaotic. And when you have a massive crowd, they just don't fit on our sidewalks. So have we looked at maybe creating or closing a street and creating a walkway all the way from our convention center to Margaret Hans Park? Where, and actually, if you're going to have a transportation, if it's going to be a tram or whatever, how are you going to make sure that it moves and it's not stuck in traffic for an hour or so?
Councilman Nowakowski, yeah, we have looked into all of what you suggested, actually, 3rd Street, 1st and 2nd Street activations to allow people to flow and provide them an opportunity to do something. There will be some of that. Some of it was not viable, so we didn't go in that direction along with the host committee and the NCAA and Turner. But there will be some activations along that route for people that want to transition back and forth to both locations to do. And as well as the trolley, and the trolley will be run in a manner that it can flow, and street closures will allow it to do so.
Alrighty, thank you. Any other comments?
Good job.
Great job, thanks. From item number 6, hiring of our police officers and replacement plan.
Chairman Nowakowski, members of the subcommittee, Mike Kurtenbach again. Although the agenda says police hiring and replacement plan, this is not going to be a traditional police hiring presentation. You may recall at last month's subcommittee meeting, there were some very specific questions that were asked of the police department surrounding our reorganization, our redeployment of resources back to patrol. So what I endeavored to do today is answer those questions and any other questions that you may pose. So the first question that was asked is, what is the true cost of a new police officer? Working in cooperation with Jeff Barton and Budget and Research, we have cost estimates that show that most of our officers come in at step 3. You'll notice that there's a discrepancy in the packet where it references step 5. Step 5 would be for some of our lateral officers who have other agency experience. So to be clear, step 3 would be about $118,000. What that includes, it includes salary and fringe to include pension costs, and includes all the new officer equipment, vest reimbursement, things like the police radio and whatnot. So although it says 120,616 in the packet, it's actually for those officers that come right out of the academy, brand new recruits, $118,000 is the true cost for a new police officer. The second question, with the upcoming department reallocation, will functions performed by those officers who are being reallocated be performed by other staff? The simple answer is yes. And let me explain. What we did as a department under Chief Williams' direction was quite literally look at every sworn position within the organization. Every position is important, but we recognize that there's a core mission that must be maintained, and with limited resources, it is critical that we ensure that we properly staff those core missions. So with that, we wanted to be sure that we had the least impact on those positions that work most closely with victims while maintaining a commitment to crime suppression. Now, there were 2 specific positions that were asked about at the last meeting. First was the crime-free multi-housing officer positions in each precinct that were previously or currently until February 20th being conducted by sworn personnel. That function will transfer to community action officers in the respective precincts. So to explain, in each squad area you have 2 community action officers. So say in the 81 squad area, one of those 2 community action officers will be responsible for the crime-free multi-housing duties for that 81 area. 73 area, 61 area, etc. The second specific position that was asked about, and I believe, Councilwoman Pastor, this was you, so I want to make sure that I have this right, was the Wake Up Grant Coordinator in the Community Relations Bureau that is responsible for the administration of 28 individual grants performed by our school resource officers in the schools. So it is correct that that officer position is being reallocated back to patrol, but we have a school resource officer sergeant who already manages our COPS hiring grants for the 15 school resource officers. If you recall, they came in 2013. I believe they actually went to the street in 2014. that individual will also manage those wake-up grants. We believe that he has the capacity to do so. The third question was, with the upcoming department reallocation, what is being done about officer positions that are being eliminated? And the short answer is no positions are being eliminated. Positions and those functions are being reallocated. We also believe that there will be a benefit by having personnel that have vast experience in investigations and elsewhere, taking that knowledge back to patrol to impart that knowledge and wisdom on officers that haven't had the benefit of those same experiences. The next two questions are going to be a little complex, so I'm going to throw out a lot of numbers, so bear with me. And if you have any questions, please, please, please ask the questions. So the first question that was posed is, what is the standard number of officers for a city the size of Phoenix based on staffing levels in other major cities? In other words, the ratio of officers per population. According to the FBI, there is no standard ratio of officers per population. In fact, the FBI website is very clear about saying that there should be tremendous caution used when we try to compare one agency of the country or in the nation to another agency or regions. But I want to share actual data that was provided by the FBI under the Uniform Crime Reporting Program. The latest full year is 2015. In 2015, 10 of the top 11 most populous cities in the United States, those are cities with populations over 1 million, actually reported their sworn staffing levels. Interestingly, Chicago did not report their ratio. But of those, 6 agencies had a higher officer per population ratio than Phoenix. In that report showed Phoenix at 1.78 per thousand. The most recent report by Budget and Research shows us at 1.83 per thousand. Yet another example that when you take a snapshot at a moment in time, you have to realize that that number fluctuates. Well, there's great variance. New York City, for example, staffs at a rate of 4.14 officers per thousand, the most populous city in the United States. The least populous among cities with over 1 million, San Jose, staffs at 0.91 officers per thousand. When we talk about region, the FBI recognizes 4 regions: Northeast, Midwest, South, and West. The Northeast staffs at an average of 4 officers per thousand. The Midwest and the South at an average of 2.3 officers per thousand. In the West, which we fall in, 1.8 officers per thousand, which if you see us at 1.83 is consistent with the staffing levels in the Western United States. The next question asked, compare the crime rate in the city of Phoenix to other major cities based on the officers they have. So first and foremost, when you look at the data, there is no information to suggest that those cities that have higher officer ratios have lower crime rates. But let me generally address violent crime and property crime. So with regard to violent crime, only 4 of the 11 major cities that I previously alluded to with populations over 1 million had a lower violent crime rate than the city of Phoenix. 4. Interestingly, 3 of the 4 had lower staffing levels than we have. Lower violent crime, but lower staffing levels. Again, hard to create a correlation there. Next, property crime. 8 of the 11 major cities had lower property crime rates when compared to Phoenix. But 2 cities that had higher rates, Houston and San Antonio. Of those 2, Houston had a higher ratio of officers per thousand, and San Antonio a lower. Of the 8 cities that had a lower crime rate, property crime rate, San Diego and San Jose had lower ratio of officers per population. So what I'm trying to relate to the council is that we need to be very careful about those correlations between officers per thousand and the effect on crime rates in the city. And the last question that was asked,
Going back, Chief,
yes, sir.
I understand that, but I think that just a precinct within my district is Estrella Mountain and Maryville that were combined. The precinct alone is as large as San Francisco. So I think that we're a little different, that we have 500 square miles that we have to cover. So I think one of the biggest concerns I'm hearing out there in the community is the response. When individuals are violated for the first time, their homes are broken into, their cars are broken into, that it takes anywhere from an hour to 6 hours for a police officer to arrive and And I think that's the first encounter that they ever have with our Phoenix police. So I think that, yes, some of these larger cities, New York and all that, Los Angeles, I mean, we're bigger than Los Angeles if you look at just the ground that we have to cover. So I think that our police officers have to really travel. I mean, especially in your district, I mean, there's areas where they would have to travel at least 15 minutes just to get to, from the precinct to the farthest point of that precinct. And even longer than that. So I think that what we're hearing out there, or what I'm hearing out there in my district, is that we do have a shortage and that we need some help, and especially when it comes to response times. And all this data is great, and I think I agree with you. We can't just go by what New York has or compare it to different cities. I think Phoenix is kind of unique as the sixth largest city and being so large in territory that we have to cover.
Chairman Nowakowski and members of the subcommittee, if I may, that point is very well taken, and we wholeheartedly agree. That's one of the very reasons why Chief Williams made the hard decision to reallocate resources back to patrol, because we recognize that that first contact usually happens when somebody's having a very bad day. And it's irresponsible to extend the length of time that somebody must wait for a police officer beyond what is actually required. And as part of that, as you are all keenly aware, with the support of the mayor and the council, we are actively hiring. We are up to 2872 sworn as of today. We have over 100 officers that are in the academy. In fact, you may recall our Phoenix-only class, Class 493, that graduated in November, of 40 officers. Those officers are going to go solo. So they'll go to other squads on March 20th. So as we continue to look for ways to get more officers out on the street as part of this plan and through continued hiring, we believe that we will drive those response times down and correspondingly crime rates down.
You have any comment? Okay.
Just the last question that was asked specifically had to do with civilianization, and I raised that point at the table last month. So to give you an update on where we're at, Chief Sandra Renteria is leading an internal committee that is following the same processes that we used for this sworn redeployment to identify those positions, again, recognizing every position is important, but what positions and functions could perhaps be better served by non-sworn personnel, thereby freeing up sworn personnel to go out and either be call-taking first responder or an investigator. We'll have a full report for you on that effort next month at next month's subcommittee meeting.
Any comments? Any comments?
Thank you.
Well, I was sitting on the same subcommittee, but at that time it was Councilmember Johnson that was chairing it. And I know that Tempe, I think it was Tempe, was coming up with a program where they were having citizens go out there and actually give out citations for blighted areas. So we asked our staff, they were saying that that's not possible. We looked into it a little bit more, and then we created that with Jerome Miller at that time, a program called Blight Busters, where people actually were trained, volunteers going out there and actually helping us with the blight issue. So I believe there's opportunities out there if we start to think outside the box on how to use non-sworn officers to really free up some of the time of our police officers when it comes to a report on insurance or so that's on a private property, and you're calling our police officers and tying them up for a couple hours to fill out a insurance form for an insurance company. And I believe those individuals should be out on the road patrolling our streets and protecting our neighborhoods. So I really like to look at this non-sworn employees and really look at the possibility of thinking outside the box and looking at what actually can non-sworn employees do and how can we free up some of that police time. The other big concern I have is I believe we really have a crisis, and we need to look at how we can recruit other officers besides out of the state of Arizona. I know that Chief Joe Yonner at the time was really for individuals that were that understand the situation that we as the city of Phoenix is having, and that was great to have recruits within the city of Phoenix and within Maricopa County that understands the diversity and the concerns of our community. But I think now we need to really reach out to colleges throughout the United States, and even looking at some of our recruits through our military that are retiring from the military, and how can we try to find the best of the best to bring them in and go through our academy and stuff. So I really think that we need to push this. I think that we have the funds to hire as many officers as possible, and let's push it to the limit. With that, I think Councilmember Pastor has some comments.
So, Chief Kurtenbach, thank you for answering our questions from our previous meeting. However, Chair, I want to make a request. This is great, and I know the way we had it. My request is to put this on our next agenda, and I would like to know, and I will get very specific, and what I would like to know is how many police officers we're hiring, how many people are retiring, how are we replacing those retirees, new officers plus replacing the retirees. I want to know the big plan. And maybe I wasn't very specific because we asked these questions, but I would like police hiring and replacement plan to demonstrate the whole picture for the next 3 years.
Councilmember Williams? Then we have a card on.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Do we currently recruit out of state? Do we travel to like some of the bases, the military bases?
Chairman Nowakowski and Councilwoman Williams limited travel to Camp Pendleton in San Diego, but large travel outside of the state, no, we do not.
Can we consider that? Can you come back and see what the possibilities are, what the cost would be? Because I would think, I mean, once you're there for months at a time, but I would think it would behoove you to advertise, go over, spend the weekend and do a recruitment. So could you bring that back as part of her list?
Yeah.
I think Councilmember Pastor has investigated some of that.
So, yes, I would like to have that part of my, part of this whole piece. I guess where I'm at is I want to understand with all the, like the wake up clubs, I got that answer, but I want to know the whole plan. And I think the general public wants to know the whole plan as to certain positions have been removed, or certain officers have been removed from these positions, and how are those proactive measures going to be handled? As the community has been trained, and all of us have been trained to do proactive measures in the community, how are we going to continue that at the level we need to continue it? For example, last night, I was encouraging all my neighbors to sign up for PMP. Then I get word that that's one of the positions that has been phased out. So that's going to be limited now. Instead of offering as many as we do for PMP, now we're only offering for a year. Everybody that was there, we encouraged them, when you see it, sign up then, because it's going to get full. The question was, well, can you train the trainer? Have a civilian train. Understanding the nuances and liability of the PMP, the answer is not really, no. So those are the kind of questions that I want to be able to go out and answer to my community or our community and say, here's how it's going to be phased out. This is what we're doing. This is how we're going to move it. So I'm glad for this because I did ask these questions. I just need the bigger picture.
Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely.
Sorry,
Councilmember Williams, I'm sorry about that.
No, I have another one on the civilian portion. I know in the court, because I was asked by some people, you have officers over there that did the research to see, go on the national and all the data banks to check out people who are coming through the court. I don't see any reason why you can't have a civilian doing that. I mean, you hold them to a high security level. But I know when I worked at the sheriff's office, had access to those data banks, and it was my responsibility to follow up with certain inmates that were going through. I just think that's something that we're not really fully expanding. I think there are more opportunities and put the police officers out where they really need to be. I think we have enough employees that are security-minded, and I am confident that they are honest and upstanding citizens and would not misuse any data bank system and would do the job very well. And I just think that would be a good opportunity for some of the other people. So I would like to have you further investigate, not just at the court, but other areas of the city, because I think there are some great opportunities to get more civilians engaged. Thank you.
You know, I have a card here. Maybe we can have Brittany Bingle, I think it's called. Come on up.
Good morning, Chairman and members of the Council. My name is Brittany Bingold. I'm with Pivotal Policy Consulting, and I'm here today on behalf of the Arizona Scrap Recyclers Association. And they wanted to voice their support to the committee regarding the police staffing and replacement plan, particularly in regards to property crime, as that's been a significant issue in the scrap metal industry. We'd like to extend our thanks to our friends in the police department who have been working very closely with the association on this issue. As well as Councilwoman Gallego and all of her work. We wanted to address that today. Also, a side note, we also are trying to pass House Bill 2044. This is the same bill that the Phoenix City Council voted to support on behalf of the city last year with metal licensing issues. And this language will clarify that the city has the authority to license dealers who deal with aluminum cans. It went through unanimously last year, but due to the process didn't get heard in the Senate. And this year we would ask the council to get our measure language on the full council agenda as soon as possible. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Vice Mayor, any comments?
Yes, thank you. And I would love it if we could put the scrap metal bill on our legislative agenda at the next opportunity for discussion. And perhaps I think the council might want to support it again this year so that we can address cans and some of the other holes that we don't quite have the authority for. And then I had a couple questions for Chief Kurtenbach. The information on the ratios was very helpful to me in understanding how we compare to other communities, and I was trying to think what's different between our community and some of the East Coast communities. And one of the things that I thought might cause the different ratios is that in cities like New York City, they have such a huge population that commutes into their city every day that the number of people who live in New York City doesn't reflect the number of people who are there during the day. Is that one of the reasons that the ratios are so different across regions?
Chairman Nowakowski and Vice Mayor Gallego, it's hard to say. But when you look at some of the East Coast cities and having the highest staffing ratios in the Northeast, there's a lot of condensed vertical policing that must be done in those cities relative to the 520 approximately square miles that exists in our city. So we believe that's one of the significant factors in why the staffing ratios are so high in the Northeast.
Wonderful. And then as we talk about out-of-state hires, could we also make sure that we include in the conversation the performance of people who come up through the Phoenix system versus people who come in from other departments? Because we have a wonderful culture here, and I just think we should look at whether the people who come up in the Phoenix culture perform at a higher level than people who come in from other communities. Because we did have a few incidents with hires from outside of our department that got some negative press, and so that ought to be part of the dialogue as well.
We can certainly do that, Vice Mayor.
Fabulous, thank you. And then I wanted to agree with Councilman Nowakowski on the precinct boundaries, and particularly the Maryville Estrella precinct being so large. I think makes it really exacerbates some of the problems we have with response times. And I think looking at those boundaries and whether we could have even out the precincts a little bit might also help us address response times in addition to hiring. So I think that really needs to be on the table, because you shouldn't have a substantively different response time if you live in one part of the city versus another, particularly for priority 3 calls. And just the way that the map was drawn, I think, has contributed to those disparities. So I'd love it if we can continue to make that part of the conversation as well. Because I think the reason we're so focused on hiring right now is because we did hear from the community about response times, but there are other things that we can do as well. Councilwoman Williams had a great suggestion about looking at whether sworn officers have to do all of the paperwork and whether there's opportunities to get them some support. I also think maybe we can do more to promote self-service options. If your home was broken into and you're gonna have to wait several hours for an officer, maybe we should make sure you're aware of the options to fill out a report on the internet for your insurance company and really promote that, so that maybe people can get the service they need and the officers can be freed up for other work. That's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Any other comments? Just closing remarks. I believe what we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out what the bottom line is, how many officers that we really need. You all are the experts, so we're trying to figure out our meetings, from block watches to neighborhood patrol to neighborhood associations. We keep on hearing we need more police officers, we need more police officers. But at the same time, we are trying to get some data and some facts together. So when we do have our budget hearings coming up and we have to decide on the city budget, we want to figure out what are the true numbers. That's why I believe we wanted to find out how much does each officer would actually cost us, so we can start to calculate those needs. So what we really need from you all is, we understand that every city would like to have more police officers out there. But what is the level of safety and good response that we want to have for those individuals in our community? And we just want that type of data, and we want to use your expertise to figure out, are we short, and how many officers are we short? If people are going to be retiring within the next 3 to 5 years, are we going to be replacing them? Are we going to be back in the same situation we find ourselves now? So that's why we're trying to ask these difficult questions. It's not that we're anti-police or we're actually pro, and we're trying to figure out how many more officers we need to go out there and hire. And if we're going to hire officers, how do we go to other pools that are out there, from the military to college campuses, to recruit the best that's out there in our country?
Chairman Nowakowski, if I may, I would never say that you're anti-police. Far from it, sir. If I could just address a couple things. We want to strike that balance as well between quality customer service to our community, while also, to the extent that we can, maximizing officer safety. It's a process. We're working through that process right now. But Councilwoman Williams, I think you're going to be very pleasantly surprised and intrigued by just how forward-thinking we're becoming with civilianization, our proposal. Places where we haven't gone in my 27 years with the organization, I'm very excited about that. And Councilwoman Pastor, we have not eliminated PNP. That's not true. We're very, very committed to the program. And as Chief Williams has said, she's been very open-minded about evaluating these reassignments. And I think you've seen that there are positions that we have put back in. Going forward, if there are opportunities, if there are gaps, we will continue to evaluate those and adjust accordingly.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we're on item number 7, virtual block watch. All right.
Thank you, Chairman Nowakowski and subcommittee members. Sandra Renteria, Assistant Chief with the Police Department. And if I could introduce also with me Commander Glenn Gardner with our Strategic Information Bureau, and one of our Forensic Imaging Unit Supervisors, Kendra Griffey. We are here today to provide you information on a new crime prevention program called Virtual Block Watch Program. And thank you. I don't know if you can hand me that. With the advances of media technology, along with the decrease in cost in digital camera systems, more individual homeowners and businesses are purchasing standalone camera systems. Excellent, thank you. The goal of the program is to partner with the community and businesses to have them voluntarily register their security cameras with the police department. The registration is free, voluntary. Our forensic imaging unit here will go out and once somebody sends in a registration form, go out and conduct site evaluation and give suggestions for areas of camera improvement and camera system, record the camera system information, etc. Some of the information there, the participant can opt out at any time. It's strictly voluntary. And only the exterior cameras for residential areas will be cataloged to ensure privacy, and we're not involving any kind of privacy issues. We can go on to some of the other ones. That's okay. And here's some of the information that will be up on our website to explain the virtual block watch program. So once this is up and running, people can go to the website to get the information. Here's the registration form. It's very simple. It takes about 10 minutes to fill out. Basically, we'll just gather the initial information from the interested citizens that want to participate. And like I said, after we receive that information, we will go out to make contact with the citizen, document what camera system they have, explain the program to them, so that way they know exactly how the program works and their ability to opt out if they choose to. And I think I covered this on, there's no live monitoring of any of the security cameras, and there's some examples of some of the exterior camera views that would be logged into our system. And I think I covered some of this also. We gather all the information after our site evaluation, provide information to the participating residents, provide them a window decal if they'd like to be able to display something that shows that they are participating in the Block Watch virtual Block Watch program that they can hang in their window if they choose to, and also give them a certificate of appreciation from the police chief. Once this system is verified from our registration and our site visit, our forensic imaging unit will enter this information into a crime mapping software, which is basically a pin map. Example is here. If somebody registered, and I don't know if they can get the cursor, Corey, or somebody can put a cursor over the Maryvale area to see if they can find. Can you activate the video on that? Play, there you go. Lower left, there's the video, there's the play button. We have one of our forensic imaging unit people going over there to help out. So here's an example. If an officer or investigator needs to locate, had a crime that occurred in a neighborhood, they could go to this crime map, see where some of these locations are where people have registered and are participating in this program. So if they decided they were going to be we're looking for a crime that occurred at 6700 West Camelback. Take us over there, and here's an example. This is the 7-Eleven that has some cameras there. This is some of the field of views that they would have. The detectives could go to the crime map, look over, cursor over the participating icon, and get some ideas of what the field of view is. So if a crime occurred in the area, and here's one from a residential area. If a crime occurred in the residential area, we know some people are participating. We can the detectives can go through and see potentially what the field of view is from that area. So they could go back, find out the time frame of the crime, see if any kind of evidence or suspects may have been going through during that time frame. And that way it gives the investigators some leads and potential suspect information, license plates, descriptions, maybe photographs of our possible suspects. So that's just an example of how that works. Next slide, please. So that's the program in a nutshell. Like I said, community members be contacted after the fact. If a detective feels that the crime occurred in that area and we need the information, the detectives will go out there, contact the community members, view to see if they have any usable information, and then request a copy at that time of the system camera video that they may have to be able to use in their case for either prosecution or to help with their investigation. And the way we are going to try to roll it out is our goal is to start off rolling it out in the Maryvale Estrella precinct. We're kind of going to do this through block watch groups, our community action officers, our business alliance network, and also through, we really want to use, Nextdoor. Thank you. Nextdoor, because that'll get it out to the neighborhoods in the area. And I just covered this. After we're trying to roll it out in phases, mainly because we do have that many people that have those camera systems, and I think once we can get the information out there, this is going to be a successful program. We want to be able to go out and there's going to be some time on the front end to be able to get the information, put it into our PIN mapping, and then you do it by precincts and go from there. So we'll start off in the Maryvale Estrella precinct, probably roll out to, Cactus Park precinct, and then keep going from there.
I guess my question's when?
Oh, good question. Our plan is to start rolling it out this month. And so we should be able to get our system up and running to have the registration form and then start hitting our community groups out in the Maryvale Estrella precinct first and then go from there. But our plan is to start rolling that out this month.
Great.
And with that, that just sums up, we just think that by partnering with our community, we believe the program has the potential to reduce crime, assist police with identifying and capturing criminals, and overall make our community safer. This program also has been in other cities, Philadelphia and here locally in Peoria and out in Queen Creek, monitored by MCSO. So that's our program. We just wanted to show that to you if anybody has any questions.
Thank you, Chief. Councilmember Pastor.
So if I signed up to be a partner, what equipment do I need to be a partner? I mean, do I need a computer? What do I need?
All you need is, a lot of people are buying those standalone security systems, cameras outside. And so if they are monitoring it, and however the community is saving it. So some people have it they save their video to their computer, some do it to the cloud, based. It's however you do it. Really, it's incumbent on our system to be able to go out and extract that information if you're willing to participate and give it to us. We only go and get it if we deem that there's need for it, and then we knock on your door and we ask you how do you save your system, and then we go from there.
Okay, so
That makes
in
sense?
my mind, I'm thinking we have this virtual block watch. I sign up, and I don't know why I was thinking this way, but I get the cameras from you, and then it's set up. I don't know why I'm thinking that. So that's why I want to be very clear, because it's you using my equipment or my storage and me signing up saying, hey, I'm willing to partner with you if you need some footage at a certain point.
That's correct. It's the individuals, if they buy their own camera systems, if they have it and they want to participate with us, they're just letting us know, I am willing to participate in this virtual block watch. If something happens, you'll come and knock on my door and then ask me for the footage.
Okay. Thank you for the clarity.
So it's like being a witness, but using your data or your video, right?
That's correct. Thank you.
Vice Mayor, any questions or comments?
Yes, 2 questions. Could we partner with some of the private companies that provide security systems, like ADT or Cox, and maybe they can help us promote this as well, because they might have access to a large pool of people who have cameras?
I don't see why we can't. Vice Mayor, thank you. That's a great idea. We can touch base with them and see how we can partner with them also.
Wonderful, because at least with my security provider, they work very closely and make sure they deploy cameras, and so they might know a lot of people who could help us, because it seems like a great program that will be very helpful, and it will be a win for the public and our department. So thank you for piloting it. Second question, this subcommittee saw a few months ago an application. We were looking for a grant from the federal government for a technology that would help us triangulate shots fired. And I've lost track of whether we got that grant or not, but it would seem like if we could pair this program with ShotSpotter technology, that we might even be able to get more benefits. Is that a program we're still looking at in terms of triangulating shots fired? And could it work with this?
Chairman Nowakowski and Vice Mayor Gallego, my understanding, I'm being told that we did not receive that grant for that, the Shots Fired program. And that would definitely be a different system than what we're talking about here. This is just utilizing equipment that individuals or businesses are purchasing on their own. And it's just more the communication and the relationship of exchanging that information or them providing that information to us. So it's not technology that, like the Shots Fired technology that actually triangulated and found the shots fired info.
Great, thank you. I'd hoped if we got the grant, they could work together and help us have eyes in more places, but maybe next time we'll do better with the grant. Thank you. That was all my questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Assistant Chief, thank you for all your hard work in making this possible. One of the biggest things I think we need to do is educate individuals, and the outreach is going to be crucial. And especially in the Maryville area, do we have stuff in Spanish or Spanish speakers to educate individuals? Because I know that there's a lot of Spanish speakers out in that precinct.
Thank you. We'll make sure we put it out in Spanish also, English and Spanish.
And then a year ago, we talked about drones, and one of the biggest concerns we had out there from residents, just the whole privacy. So even educating individuals in this program that all of a sudden they can't be pointing their cameras in back of people's yards or trying to, I know that there's some drug dealing houses out there and this and that, and we don't want them to get into dangerous situations where they're trying to video individuals doing bad acts. It's just your cameras that you have set up in front of your house. Now it's really popular where you ring the doorbell, there's a camera there also. It's just of your own property. We don't want you to start pointing towards your neighbors or trying to be detectives on your own, right?
Correct.
And Chairman Nowakowski and members of the subcommittee, that's an excellent point. And as a matter of fact, that is part of the reason for the site assessment that occurs prior to actually registering the cameras, is that the staff will go out and actually take a look at the angles where these cameras are to ensure that we're either not infringing on anybody's privacy or not putting anyone in any excessive danger. So I think that's an excellent point.
Chief, once more, and thank you, Commander, for all your efforts in thinking outside the box and using technology to its fullest, and we'll continue to come up with great programs like this. Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, we decided to continue the department budgets updates. We're running a little late, and some of my colleagues have other meetings they have to go to. So we have call to the public. We have no cards at this moment, and we have some future agenda items that we mentioned prior to this that I'm not sure if there's anything else that my colleagues would like to put on there. Councilmember Williams?
I received this letter, I think everybody on the council did, including the mayor, on Chuck E. Cheese gambling.
What?
Yes, somehow we have a city ordinance that Chuck E. Cheese and another one of the pizza parlors, the games they have in there fall under our gambling ordinance, and that's just wrong.
Oh, because the
I'm
tickets
not-
they receive?
Yeah,
they receive
it's got to do with the
rewards.
tickets, the toys, whatever, but could we review that and bring that ordinance to this subcommittee?
I think our
I-
presiding judge can look into that for us and
Yeah.
tackle the Chuck E. Cheese issue, right?
Yeah, this is a big Chuck E. Cheese item.
You think we'll need some investigators to go down there and try out the,
Mr. Chairman, my granddaughters have worn me out with Chuck E. Cheese.
I know.
If I never see the big mouse again, I'm all good with it.
I understand, Toll.
It's not
How many
until
tickets
10
can
years
you have?
old, or even past 14, 15.
That's all.
that's it? We're talking about Chuck E. Cheese. I was getting text from my son. He's 3 years old and he's waving on the television to me. So hi, Uncle. And then with that, we adjourn the meeting. Thank you.